into that hearing room carrying herself like she still controlled everything, black binder in hand, chin raised, polished smile, ready for the cameras. After surviving months of questions surrounding Jeffrey Epstein by stonewalling senators, redirecting conversations, dragging hearings out, and insulting critics, while every single time she still managed to leave the Capitol untouched, still serving as Attorney General of the United States, and still protected by the system around her. But this hearing became different because for the first time she made a mistake nobody expected, bringing something into that room that ended up turning against her. Carried a name that was not Epstein's at all, but belonged to a sitting member of Congress, setting off one of the most explosive moments Washington had seen in 2026 as the nation watched the country's top law enforcement official trigger a chain reaction that reportedly left even Donald Trump frozen, while figures like Mike Johnson began breaking ranks and people across Washington finally started saying out loud what they had quietly whispered for months, that the situation was collapsing. And on February 11, 2026, during a House Judiciary Committee hearing, Bondi took her seat while cameras rolled and an audience of millions prepared to witness something that could not easily be forgotten. Because for months, members of Congress had quietly visited the Department of Justice to review unredacted Epstein files containing names, evidence, and records the public had never been allowed to see. Material prosecutors had collected over years involving the network connected to one of the most notorious sex trafficking cases in modern American history, and lawmakers were only permitted to review those documents inside a secure room containing 4 computers with no phones, no staff, and DOJ employees standing directly behind them monitoring every move, a detail that later became impossible to ignore. So when Bondi sat down and Democrats once again pressed her with the same questions they had been asking for months about how many of Epstein's alleged co-conspirators had been indicted, whether a task force would ever be created, and what responsibility the DOJ owed to the victims, her answers remained evasive, including one moment where she dismissed a congresswoman's question about victims by saying she was not going to get in the gutter for theatrics. And then everything shifted when a photographer captured an image nobody expected because Bondi's black binder had opened just enough for cameras to clearly reveal bold printed words that appeared to read Pramila Jayapal search history, followed by what looked like a detailed list containing file numbers, search terms, and document references connected to what the Congresswoman had privately searched while reviewing Epstein evidence inside DOJ systems, exposing the fact that the Department of Justice had apparently been tracking what lawmakers searched during confidential file reviews, and that Bondi had brought that information into the hearing room almost like a political weapon, causing immediate chaos as Democrats stood up. Republicans shifted uneasily, and Jayapal reportedly reacted with icy anger while accusing Bondi of bringing what she described as a burn book into the hearing, saying the printed search history of what she reviewed was outrageous and promising to pursue the matter further. But the moment that truly changed everything came when a reporter turned to Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, one of Trump's most loyal allies in Congress, and asked him a direct question about whether Bondi's actions were appropriate, because after pausing, Johnson responded in a way Washington rarely hears from him by saying that if the reports were true, then the behavior would be inappropriate. And the following day, he doubled down publicly by stating that lawmakers should obviously have the freedom to review those files privately and at their own pace without anyone tracking their searches, before looking directly into the cameras and saying he would repeat that message to anyone inside the DOJ, meaning the Speaker of the House had publicly rebuked the sitting Attorney General and acknowledged that a line had been crossed, which carried enormous weight considering Johnson had previously used House procedure to delay votes connected to Epstein file transparency, adjourned sessions early to avoid forcing Republicans onto the record, and defended Trump through virtually every major controversy, making this public criticism feel less like a minor disagreement and more like a visible fracture inside the Republican establishment itself. Because what everyone in Washington understood immediately was that Johnson was not simply criticizing Bondi personally, but drawing a public line that signaled there was now a level of weaponization even he would not defend, forcing Republicans everywhere to choose sides, while some like Darrell Issa brushed the controversy aside and Jim Jordan expressed full confidence in Trump's team. Kappa Leva, T.I., The damage had already been done because Johnson's comments were now permanently in the public record and dominating headlines across the country, while inside the White House reports claimed Trump was increasing. Frustrated as the Epstein files controversy continued growing into a political disaster after Bondi had publicly claimed back in February 2025 that a client list was sitting on her desk ready for review. Yet more than a year later, no such list had appeared, no major co-conspirators had been indicted, and millions of documents had reportedly been released with victims' names still visible, creating a catastrophic situation that exposed the very people the DOJ was supposed to protect. And then came the binder controversy, Johnson distancing himself publicly, and Republicans from multiple factions turning against her before the House Oversight Committee, chaired by James Comer, formally JOW, subpoenaed Bondi in what was no longer just a Democratic effort but a bipartisan institutional move by Congress itself, demanding answers. Yet Bondi skipped the deposition and the committee immediately began moving toward contempt proceedings, creating the first moment since taking office where the woman who once walked into every hearing room with total confidence suddenly seemed to have nowhere left to hide. Until April 2, 2026, when Trump announced on Truth Social that Bondi had been fired, ending her 14-month run as Attorney General after reports claimed Trump had become deeply frustrated because the Epstein controversy refused to disappear, political opponents remained standing. The binder moment had become symbolic of everything going wrong, and every extra day Bondi remained in office only seemed to make the controversy larger, continuing a pattern many in Washington have noticed involving figures like Jeff Sessions, William Barr, and Mike Pence, where loyalty alone is never enough if the political problem itself cannot be eliminated. But what many people still overlook is that Bondi's firing did not end her legal exposure at all, and may have actually increased it because now she no longer had the authority or institutional protection of the Justice Department behind her, and instead became just another witness, one who skipped a congressional deposition, one scheduled to testify before the House Oversight Committee on May 29, 2026, one reportedly facing investigation by the DOJ Inspector General over compliance failures connected to the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and one also under separate review by the Government Accountability Office, all while the files themselves still remain unreleased in full as lawmakers from both political parties who reviewed the unredacted material continue warning publicly that the alleged co-conspirator list would shock the public, including comments from Representative Jared Moskowitz after he reviewed the documents, raising questions about what exactly inside those files has required this level of institutional resistance, why lawmakers' searches were allegedly monitored, and what names still remain hidden behind redactions. Questions that only grow louder after Bondi's removal. Bassettete, while Mike Johnson's public criticism now appears less accidental and more calculated because he understood the political landscape was changing and positioned himself carefully for whatever comes next, as Washington slowly realizes the Epstein files issue is not disappearing due to mounting pressure from bipartisan coalitions in Congress, DOJ watchdogs, the GOW, survivors present during the overwhelming congressional vote demanding transparency, and a public that continues demanding answers, leaving Trump politically trapped because every move tied to this issue seems to create another problem, while inherits the same files, the same subpoenas, and the same demands for accountability, proving there may never have been a clean way out of this story, only increasingly expensive delays, and in many ways Johnson already said what he believed in the careful language politicians use when they know history is watching, because when the Speaker of the House publicly tells the President's own Attorney General that she crossed a line, that is not simply criticism but a political calculation from someone deciding where to stand before the damage becomes impossible to escape, which is often how confessions happen in Washington, not through dramatic speeches or emotional apologies, but through carefully chosen sentences designed to survive permanently in the public record. And now the situation stands with Bondi preparing to testify on May 29th, the DOJ Inspector General investigation still underway, the GAO probe continuing, the co-conspirator list still hidden, and the unredacted files still locked in litigation, while somewhere inside those documents reviewed under surveillance by lawmakers sits information important enough to trigger every delay, every stonewalling tactic, every early adjournment, every subpoena battle, and every political fracture now spreading across Washington. And when those details finally become public, because history suggests they eventually will, many people will likely look back at February 11, 2026, the hearing room, the black binder, the exposed search history, and Mike Johnson publicly calling it inappropriate as the exact moment everything truly started breaking apart, because Trump could not stop the fallout, Bondi could not contain it, and Johnson, in one unusually honest moment, quietly revealed what many powerful people already understood. Refused to say directly that the situation had already moved beyond anyone's control, and the only mystery left was how the story ultimately ends and how many more names get pulled into it before that day arrives, which is why so many eyes are now fixed on May 29th when Bondi enters that room again, not as Attorney General, but simply as a witness, without the protection of the DOJ, without the authority she once relied on, and without a binder full of other people's search histories to use as cover, because when that moment comes, the atmosphere inside that hearing room may feel completely different from anything Washington has seen so far.